You know, there's a question none of us really wants to think about. What happens when the person you've shared your life with is suddenly gone? For many seniors, this isn't just a sad thought experiment. It's a quiet reality that arrives one ordinary Tuesday morning. And the way we handle it can either shrink our remaining years into loneliness or open a door we never expected. Today, I want to share a true story about my grandfather. After 54 years of marriage, he found himself completely alone. What he did next surprised everyone, including himself. And the three simple choices he made in the months that followed didn't just help him survive his loss. They gave him a kind of purpose he hadn't felt since his 30s. If you've ever wondered how to keep living fully after a devastating goodbye, stay with me for a few minutes. This one hits close to home. My grandfather's name was Walter. He wasn't a famous man. He never made headlines or built a fortune. He was just a retired high school history teacher who loved baseball, strong black coffee, and my grandmother, Eleanor. They met when they were 19 years old at a church picnic in Ohio. He used to say she laughed at a joke he told before he even finished the punchline, and in that moment, he knew. They married 2 years later and built a quiet, steady life together. 4 children, 7 grandchildren, a small house with a creaky porch swing, and a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. Their love wasn't the kind you see in movies. It was the kind that shows up every single day for decades without fanfare. It was in the way she ironed his shirts and the way he filled her car with gas every Sunday so she'd never have to stand out in the cold. When Eleanor passed away in her sleep at 77, Walter was 79. I remember sitting with him in the funeral home parking lot, watching people walk inside. He just stared out the window and said something I'll never forget. He said, 54 years isn't enough when you're with the right person. That sentence broke something in me, but it also made me worry deeply about what came next. We'd all heard the statistics. Elderly men who lose their spouses often decline rapidly. Isolation creeps in. Purpose fades. The will to take care of yourself quietly slips away. My dad and his siblings started calling Walter 3 times a day. They invited him to dinner constantly. Everyone treated him like a fragile piece of glass. And honestly, for the first month, he acted like one too. He barely left the house. He stopped shaving. His recliner became an island. The television stayed on all night. We were watching a slow-motion surrender. But then, something shifted. And it started with a trip to the grocery store. One Wednesday morning, Walter ran out of milk for his coffee. It sounds so small, doesn't it? But when you're deep in grief, even a missing carton of milk can feel like an impossible crisis. He couldn't find his car keys at first. He almost gave up twice. But eventually, he drove to the grocery store, wearing a wrinkled jacket and 3 days of stubble. While standing in the cereal aisle, he noticed an old man in a tweed cap squinting at a box of oatmeal, like it was written in a foreign language. Walter felt a strange tug, something he hadn't felt in weeks, the urge to help. He walked over and read the ingredients out loud. The man thanked him, and they got to talking. His name was Frank. He was 83, a retired mechanic, and he'd lost his own wife 6 years earlier. Standing there between the bran flakes and the instant oats, Frank said something that lit the first small spark of hope in Walter's heart. He said, "The first year is just survival. But after that, you get to decide who you want to be." Walter went home with his milk and a strange new feeling. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was more like a tiny flicker of possibility. He sat down at the kitchen table, Eleanor's empty chair across from him, and asked himself a terrifying question. If he couldn't bring her back, and he didn't want to just wait around to die, then what was he supposed to do with the time he had left? That question sat with him for 3 full days. He didn't have an answer at first, but he kept coming back to Frank's words. You get to decide who you want to be. At 79 years old, Walter realized he'd never actually asked himself that question. He'd always been someone's husband, someone's father, someone's teacher. Those roles were beautiful and meaningful. But with Eleanor gone and the kids long since grown, those roles had faded. Who was Walter? Just Walter, standing on his own 2 feet. That question became his compass. The first decision Walter made was to stop hiding in his house. Now, I want to pause here because many seniors don't realize just how quickly isolation becomes a trap. When you're grieving, the house feels safe. It's quiet. It doesn't demand anything from you. But what Walter learned, and what I've seen again and again in the seniors I work with, is that your home can slowly become a cage if you let it. The walls don't hold you, they hold you back. Walter decided he would leave the house every single day. No excuses. Not for big adventures necessarily. Some days it was just a walk to the mailbox and back. Other days he'd drive to the library and read the newspaper in a different chair. The goal wasn't to be social or productive. The goal was simply to prove to himself that the world outside still existed and that he still belonged in it. This small daily commitment rewired something in his brain. It reminded him that he was still alive and that life, even a life marked by loss, still had texture and sound and unexpected moments. The second thing Walter did was even more important. He decided to focus on what he could give, rather than what he had lost. This shift might sound subtle, but it's powerful. Grief is naturally self-focused. You feel your own pain. You count your own losses. You carry your own loneliness. And none of that is wrong or selfish. It's human. But Walter realized that his pain wasn't shrinking the more he stared at it. It only started to shrink when he looked outward. He remembered how it felt to help Frank in the cereal aisle. That brief moment had felt better than any hour he'd spent in his recliner. So he started looking for small ways to be useful. He offered to watch his neighbor's dog when she went to physical therapy. He started tutoring his grandson's friend in American history for free. He fixed a squeaky door at his church without being asked. None of these things were grand gestures, but each one reminded him that he still had value to offer the world. His hands still worked. His mind still held knowledge worth sharing. His presence still mattered. Many seniors don't realize that purpose isn't something you find. It's something you build, one small act of service at a time. The third decision Walter made was the boldest. He decided to take a trip by himself. For context, this was a man who hadn't traveled alone since his honeymoon in 1958. The thought of eating alone in a restaurant or sleeping in a hotel bed without Eleanor beside him felt almost traitorous. But he'd been talking to Frank more often by then, and Frank had planted another seed. He said, "The memories don't go away if you leave town. They come with you, but sometimes they hurt less when you're seeing something new." So Walter booked a small cabin in the Smoky Mountains for 3 nights. He packed a bag, got in his old sedan, and drove 6 hours east. He told me later that the first night was terrible. He sat on the cabin porch, listened to the crickets, and cried until his ribs hurt. But the next morning, something remarkable happened. He woke up to the smell of pine trees and wood smoke. He made coffee on a tiny stovetop. And for the first time in nearly a year, he felt hungry. Not just for food, hungry for the day ahead. He drove into town, ate pancakes at a diner, and struck up a conversation with a couple from Michigan who turned out to be retired teachers just like him. They exchanged emails. They told him about a national park they loved. By the time he drove home, he wasn't healed, but he was different. He had proof now that joy and grief could coexist, that a broken heart could still beat with curiosity. Now I share these 3 decisions with you not because they're magic solutions, they're not. Grief doesn't follow a neat timeline, and no amount of walking or volunteering or traveling will make you miss your person any less. But what Walter's story shows us is that we have more control over our healing than we think. His 3 choices, getting out of the house daily, focusing on what he could give, and daring to try something new, created a kind of scaffolding around his shattered heart. They didn't fix everything, but they held him up long enough for the light to start creeping back in. Over the next several years, Walter kept building on these choices. He started a weekly coffee group for widowers in his neighborhood. It wasn't formal, just 4 or 5 men sitting at a diner, talking about their wives and their gardens and their stubborn grandchildren. He began walking 2 miles every morning, not because a doctor told him to, but because he discovered it cleared his head. He started reading again, something he'd abandoned in his grief. First, it was history books, his old comfort zone. Then, at the suggestion of a librarian half his age, he tried fiction. He discovered he loved crime novels. There was something oddly satisfying about seeing a mystery get solved by the final chapter. He even adopted a scruffy terrier mix named Gus who needed a home. That dog gave him a reason to get up at dawn and a companion who never tired of hearing about Eleanor. Walter would sit on the porch, swing with Gus in his lap, and tell stories about the woman who laughed at his jokes before the punchline, and he said it felt like she was still listening. The thing that strikes me most about my grandfather's journey is how ordinary it was. He didn't climb a mountain or remarry or write a best-selling book. He just quietly, stubbornly refused to let his story end in that recliner. And because of that refusal, he got 8 more years of meaningful life. 8 years of sunrises and laughter and bad diner coffee with friends who understood. He passed away at 87, peacefully, in his sleep, just like Eleanor. I like to think she was waiting for him, ready to hear the rest of his stories. But here's what I want you to take away from all of this. If you're in that first month of loss, that first year of survival, please be gentle with yourself. You don't have to make big changes right now. You don't have to book a cabin or start a club or adopt a dog. Just get through today. But when you're ready, and you'll know when that is, remember, Walter, remember that you get to decide who you want to be. Your person would want you to keep living. They'd want you to taste pancakes in a mountain diner. They'd want you to laugh again, even if it feels impossible right now. They'd want you to find the others who understand your pain and sit with them in the morning light. As we get older, loss becomes a more frequent companion. But it doesn't have to be the only companion. I hope Walter's story gave you a little bit of hope today. If it did, and if you think it might help someone else who's struggling, please share this video. Let's build a community where no senior has to face their darkest days alone. And if you want more stories like this, Stories about real people finding purpose and health and connection after 60, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started, and I'd love for you to be part of this journey. Take care of yourself today, and I'll see you in the next one.